Lately, there have been several instances of people trespassing into zoo enclosures, resulting in tragic outcomes, often for the animals. However, in the following account, we will witness how a man defied numerous warnings and endangered himself by entering a zoo enclosure. The events that ensued that day left everyone in tears. Occasionally, we encounter another creature, be it a human or an animal, and upon reflection, we recognize the many steps that led up to that particular moment. Had circumstances altered even slightly, the encounter may never have occurred, resulting in a vastly different outcome. The same applies to our tale today. If certain variables had differed, two paths may have never converged, resulting in a vastly altered outcome. JoJo the chimpanzee was born in the wild and lived a relatively pleasant life for a brief period. However, tragedy struck when his mother fell victim to poachers, leaving the helpless infant to fend for himself. The incident was both heartbreaking and devastating. The rest of the family abandoned him since he didn't have a mother. He would have died if humans had not intervened. It was a sad situation. Human intervention had cost him his life in the wild, but now it was also going to be the thing that saved him. JoJo went to a few sanctuaries that would care for him, and he eventually ended up in the newly built exhibit of the Detroit Zoo. Back then it was state-of-the-art and beautiful. It gave the chimps loads of space to play and live in an environment that was as natural as possible. It seemed like the best situation that JoJo could have landed in, since he could not go back to the wild, and it was pretty good until that one terrible day. The other half of the situation that eventually played out was Rick Swope. He was the type of man who worked hard and could never believe that anyone could consider him a hero. And yet that is exactly what he would eventually become. As a truck driver, Rick spent a lot of time away from his family. That is why he tried to do a lot of family activities with his wife and their 3 kids during the times that he was home. They had heard about the new enclosure and the children were dying to see the chimps. The family read up about these animals before they went to the zoo, and Rick and his wife explained that even though these monkeys looked incredibly cute and cuddly, they could be dangerous. They are much stronger than humans, and if they feel threatened, they can be very dangerous. They are also highly intelligent animals that understand a lot more than many people credit them with. Of course, this was all just a bit of interesting information to make the day even more enjoyable, and to help the children learn to understand and respect the animals that they were looking at. They would be seeing these creatures from the safety of the viewing area, with the chimps in their enclosures and the humans behind a railing where they could not meet up. It would be no problem. When the family got to the zoo, it was already really crowded. It seemed like the whole population of Detroit had shown up to look at the new enclosure, but there was no turning back now. The children had their hearts set on looking at some animals, and that is what the family would do. There was so much to see and do in the zoo before they even got to the chimp closure. They looked at some other animals and got ice cream along the way. The weather was beautiful, and everyone was in a great mood. It was one of those special days when it feels like nothing could go wrong until it does. The line for the enclosure was long, and it took a while for the family to get to the front and to be able to see the monkeys playing. As Rick stood in front of the chimp enclosure, he was amazed to see that they were smaller than humans. Considering how powerful they are, he expected them to be bigger. All the bystanders were giggling at 2 chimps playing in the enclosure. Some of the zoo staff were even looking on with smiles. One chimp was chasing the other. The chimp who was being chased was JoJo, the monkey who had lost his family and his freedom. Experts who would later look at the footage had a different take on how things were playing out. They said that it wasn't playing as much as JoJo trying to get away from a more domineering male that wasn't happy with the smaller chimp. If that was the case, then he was already in a high-stress situation that was going to get a lot worse in seconds. The enclosure was surrounded by water. This used to be a common safety precaution to keep animals inside their enclosure. But in the years since then, many zoos had taken this away from their monkey enclosures because it proved to be too dangerous to the animals. In front of everyone that was watching, JoJo slipped and fell into the water. Chimpanzees can't swim, and he was quickly drowning. For a few seconds, Rick looked around to see who was going to step up and help. Surely the zoo staff would not allow an animal to drown right in front of them, but even as the onlookers asked them to go in, they all refused. They said it was too dangerous. They had to follow the correct safety precautions. It was clear that no one was going to help. Rick could not live with that for a split second. He looked into JoJo's eyes, and it felt like the monkey was asking for help. Help that no one was going to give. Those eyes, which reminded Rick of a human's, were pleading, and Rick could not ignore those pleas. He had to act. He climbed a security wall and jumped into the water to help. The zoo staff were shouting at him to get out, but he wasn't listening. He wasn't thinking of his own safety. His focus was now on the animal that had sunk to the bottom. He grabbed hold of JoJo, but then he slipped from his. It was a struggle to see where he was, but the bystanders started to direct him. Finally, he got hold of the monkey. He seemed lifeless at first, but then Rick realized that the animal was watching him. It was a relief since Rick was worried he would have to do CPR on the monkey. He would later recall that JoJo had never tried to hurt him. Instead, the chimp seemed to understand that he was trying to help. It did also help that he was tired from the struggle in the water and out of breath from the chase with the other animal. He had no more fight left in him, but that was okay. Since Rick was willing to fight for both their sakes, he dragged the chimp to the side of the water. Remember, this was a moat that was designed to keep the animals inside, not to allow them to get out. The battle had not been won yet. Rick tried to put JoJo on the side of the water, but he was so exhausted that he would just slip back inside. Then Rick would have to go and grab him again. This was not turning out to be the relaxing day at the zoo that Rick and his family had planned. Some of the bystanders were shouting at Rick to stay with JoJo, which would put him in even more danger. It was peculiar since they displayed no willingness to take the risk, but Rick had come too far to back down. What he did next is sure to tug at your heartstrings. Instead of abandoning JoJo by the water's edge, Rick went above and beyond. He emerged from the water and dragged JoJo over the cables that were intended to prevent chimps from entering the water. Afterward, he gently placed the weakened chimp on the ground, where he could recover. Rick might have stayed longer to ensure JoJo's recovery, but another male chimp approached him, baring his teeth. Knowing it was time to leave, Rick hastily returned to the water and swam to the other side of the enclosure, eventually clambering out. Rick never saw himself as a hero, but we certainly do. Thank you for witnessing this awe-inspiring animal account. Tune in again for more stories about animals and the individuals they touch.